Gonna gonna get started right at 6:30.
I think we were going to wait a couple minutes. Were we thinking about that?
Okay. Do we want to wait till everybody gets admitted?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we're ready to get started. So I appreciate everyone coming tonight and thank you for making time to be here. I want to, say that your opinions do matter to us, and that's why we hold these meetings. We're doing this one tonight online, and then we're going to do another one tomorrow night in person at City Hall. And if you hear anything tonight that is of interest to you, we'd be happy to answer questions, but we'd also appreciate it if you talk to folks about what you learned tonight out in the community. And after you deliberate about the proposals you'll learn about at these two public meetings and through the online feedback, the Financial Sustainability Taskforce will consider the feedback and any changes, any recommendations as needed before they present those recommendations to our city council in February. And the city council would be provided with feedback from these meetings as well. So, next slide. Yep, muted myself for a second there. Okay. So for tonight's agenda, we will be looking at the advertisements for these meetings. They mentioned that there'd be a brief presentation by staff tonight, and I want to apologize in advance because brief is subject to interpretation. There's a lot of material here, even for folks who work in government. Our presentation is likely to take about an hour, pending questions, and we believe it is important to do our best to help people understand municipal budgeting before asking you to weigh in on these options. So here's the agenda for tonight. You can see it up on the screen there. And we should have about an hour after this for you to work in small groups and to have conversations, ask and answer more questions, and help provide feedback for us. So here's our project team, and that's me on the left. That's Jeff Knighton, city manager. And then we have with us tonight Carolyn Hope, who's our deputy city manager. Sergey, who is our finance director, is also here. And Sienna, who is our communications and engagement manager, is with us. We did have a team from a consulting firm, Baker Tilly, that helped put a lot of this material together, helped us put all of this information together and worked with the financial task force. They're not here with us tonight, but I did want to recognize them for their work. Steve Toller and Michael Perkins did a lot to help us put all the information together and be able to present it to you in a way that is understandable, easy to follow along, or easy as it can be. So the Financial Sustainability Taskforce, we formed this advisory group to learn more about city budgeting and to provide well thought out options for City Council to consider that include their rationale for what types of budget and service impacts they find acceptable or not. And for the FST members, I know there are several here. I won't ask you to stand tonight, but I will tomorrow night when we're in person. And when we break into groups, we'll have you all introduce yourselves. Um, the task force members represent demographics of our community. This was very important to our city council and our city team. We wanted to ensure we were hearing from people from various perspectives and life experiences. So our budget priorities, the city council adopted the 2025 through 2029 strategic plan to set goals and priorities for that period of time. And it is based on community feedback through meetings and surveys. Some of the key elements include being efficient, leveraging our assets with partnerships, being transparent in decision making, engage the community in evaluating options for our long range budget, to resolve the budget gap and to maintain our levels of service for public safety. It's also very important to us that we provide equitable services for all. Um, that was something that was a guiding principle for what we're trying to do here. So the city staff understood we were heading into a budget deficit several years ago, back in 2023, and we wanted to be proactive about addressing it. We requested assistance from a consultant to develop a long-range financial plan and financial model to help us work with the community and the city council to develop solutions before they become a problem. The consultant, Baker Tilly, I introduced a couple of their members a little while ago, is an important element in this project because they provide the resources where we are short right now. For one example, we have been working on closing and auditing our books from 2021 to present. We've started that and have been working on that since I joined the city in April of 2023. This will be the first year since 2021 that we close our books on time. Baker Tilly provides a neutral perspective on where service reductions can be made and how to be most transparent with the community. They bring experience from around the country, including experience implementing similar plans and strategies with other cities. And they provided an outside set of eyes to scrutinize our long-range forecast and key assumptions. Something very important. We're not just trying to solve the issue today. We want to solve it longer term. So we're not just kicking the can down the road. We're trying to solve it for a good chunk of time, at least a decade. So Baker Tilly conducted a significant amount of research to prepare this plan and the budget strategies. Department directors and senior staff, subject matter experts and Baker Tilly conducted over 23 interviews with city and department leadership to gain insights into current city operations and practices. Representatives from all city departments participated, as well as members of the city council, representing a diverse range of positions and functional areas. And we conducted an all-employee survey about budget ideas, and we received about 30 responses. These ideas are reflected in the budget strategies, and there are also ideas for operational efficiencies. As a side note, we recently sent 2 employees to Six Sigma Lean training. I know that is a popular training course to identify efficiencies in both the public and the private sector. And Baker Tilly took this data and developed about 30 possible budget strategies. After reviewing these with our team, we narrowed them down to 22 that are feasible and more predictable budget strategies. And then the financial task force themselves also developed 16 possible recommendations. So the financial task force met 5 times in 2025, and you can see on the timeline here, we're now in the public engagement process to draft the task force recommendations, or to vet the draft task force recommendations. Next, the task force will finalize the recommendations and present them to City Council on February 26th. So February 26th is a work session, and Council may need time to review and evaluate the recommendations before making a decision. So we don't expect any concrete decisions on the 26th, just discussion and fact finding. And in the spring, we are planning some public meetings to discuss potential options for service cuts and revenues in 2027 and beyond in preparation for the 2027-2028 biennial budget. So a little bit of background.
Okay, that's mine.
And I'll turn that over to Sergey. Yeah.
Okay, so our first issue in the general fund is an annual gap between the revenues and expenditures. That's approximately 4.2 million a year. Then this increases to 5.4 million starting in 2030. So we need to assess how to bridge this gap. Next slide. So the second issue is that the city has cash reserves that are for any emergencies, any unexpected expenditures. You know, if we have a Vector truck that breaks down and we never budgeted for it, things like that, any natural disasters. So on this graph, currently the city's reserve threshold is 5% of expenditures, and the best practices is 20%. So 20% is our goal. The green line, the dotted green line, represents the minimum reserve goal, which is the 20%. So in this graph, you can see that in 2026, the city will fall below the minimum reserve goal of 20%. Then in 2027, the city will fall below the reserve threshold of 5%. And it continues if we don't take steps to rectify this trend. So this graph is the trends in revenues and expenditures, and the blue line, they're the revenues, and they are holding fairly steady. They're going down a bit with property tax, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And also gambling tax. The city receives gambling tax, and we do have a business that is in bankruptcy, so we'll be losing that revenue. And the expenditures, they keep increasing, rising costs, and we'll keep seeing that trend. So how's our budget organized? I just talked about the general fund and all of the green items. The general fund is basically our operating fund. So all of the items in the green box, administration, police, public safety, all of those are under the general fund. And that's what we're really talking about in this task force. Then we do have special revenue funds. And these funds have their own revenue, but they are subsidized by the general fund, and they are restricted to the like street operations, recreation, and we have other funds that are restricted funds. Then we have the internal service funds, and those are services that we provide to other departments within the city. And they are funded by the different departments. So part of the general fund, it does fund internal service funds. Capital improvement funds, there are large projects. Usually the general fund provides some level of funding, but we do also receive grants, we receive donations. And then the enterprise funds, these are considered like a business. So those are our utilities. And they have their own revenue source. And usually we don't exchange money in between, like the enterprise funds cannot pay for things for the general fund unless it originally was paid out of the general fund or there's a tax or something, but we can't pull any of that money for general fund operations. So these two graphs on the left, these are the revenues, and the general fund represents about 30% of the total city budget. The majority of the revenues, as you can see, is sales tax. That's the highest revenue that we receive is sales tax. And then we have utility taxes. And utility taxes are not just the city utilities. These are electricity, cable, natural gas, garbage. All of these utilities have a tax that the city does receive a small portion of it. And then the third largest is property tax. And then on the right are the expenditures, and the majority of our expenditures, a good portion of it goes to public safety, 8.8 million. So that's the police, and we have court system, and that is our largest. And then the next is administration. So in administration, that's the city council, city manager's office, finance, HR, and we have some others in there. And then you can see the other ones a little bit smaller compared to administration and safety. Transfers out, you'll see that's 3.8 million. And those are transfers out of the general fund to subsidize other funds within the city. Next. So where can the money come from for cities in Washington state? So this is just not Mount Lake Terrace. This is all cities in Washington state. So we have property tax. This includes the general levy, and then we do have levy lid lifts that are voter approved. And the only one that Mount Lake Terrace has is a voter approved levy for City Hall. And the voter approved is usually restricted like that. It can only be used to make the payments on City Hall, on the building that was built in, you know what, I don't have the date, but 2000, yes,
2021, 22.
21, 22, and that will continue till 2047, I believe, is when the bond is paid off, and then that levy goes away. Then we have sales and use tax, and sometimes can be restricted. It's also a tax that is less predictable, and it's really dependent on our economy. And business and occupation tax. Currently, the city does not have a B&O tax on businesses, and we do have one large business, but we are trying to attract several businesses into the community. Utility taxes. These are subject to state limits, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of these and our challenges with them. Lodging tax, that's restricted for tourism. We cannot use that in the general fund. It's for tourism promotion. And then REIT, real estate excise tax. It's a tax on property sales, and it's restricted for mainly capital projects. And then we have impact fees, and they're paid by developers for streets and parks and can only be used for streets and parks. And we have some state shared revenues, and some restrictions apply to some of these. And you can see transportation, criminal justice, liquor and cannabis. Then we have fees, permits, and charges, and these are paid by developers, development fees, business licenses, and other fees. And then other revenues, we have fines, investment, income, donations, and grants, and some of these have restrictions to them. So I'll go through the challenges of each one of these. The property taxes. So the city council can only increase the property tax by 1% annually, and that is a state law. And the voters, of course, like I talked about in the previous slide, voters can increase it for certain things. Now, I just want to make sure that it's understood that that's the city's amount, that's 1%. Property owner's tax does not increase by 1%. So for this coming year, the 1% increase that comes to the city is approximately $33,000 more. The sales and use tax, Mount Lake Terrace is already the second highest in the state. It's 10.5%. So that's a real challenge to increase sales tax. B&O tax, that we do not have at this time. And like I said before, we're working on attracting businesses so we can increase that sales tax. Utility taxes, subject to state limits, and Mount Lake Terrace is on the high end. And on most of the utility taxes, we have already reached the state limit. I think we have just a minor, maybe a percentage or two on maybe one. So that's a real challenge there that we're unable to really increase that. Lodging tax. We have one hotel. We are working on bringing in another hotel. And lodging tax, I think I mentioned before that is a restricted funding, and we are unable to use it for the general fund. REIT, that's less predictable, depends on our economy. So that's a challenge. And impact fees, that's the same thing. It's dependent on our economy. And the state shared revenues, that's more predictable, but we do have limited revenue on that. And the fees, permits, and charges, those are also less predictable and dependent on our economy. And then there are the other revenues, fines, investments, and donation grants. And the donations and grants, they are for one-time projects. Usually we receive those for large capital projects.
So how did we get here? So over time, we have had an imbalance of revenues and expenses, and we will talk about each of these in more detail, but at a high level, on the revenue side, there are limitations that Sergey just talked about on how cities can raise revenues. We've kept costs down by limiting salary increases, special projects, and use of consultants, which has led to other challenges. On the expenses side, inflation, which we're all dealing with in our personal lives, and the city is not immune to that. We had market adjustments that had been, in some cases, had not been done in a decade or more for city staff. And then for liability insurance, in the past 5 years, our costs for premiums for liability insurance have doubled. Another major factor at a high level is the costs for prosecution and public defense and jail costs. A night in a bed in jail has gone up a lot over the last few years. So, next slide. So we're not alone. This problem is systemic. 61% of the cities in Washington State are having similar issues to what we're laying out tonight. Cities are struggling with that 1% cap that Sergey mentioned, and limited other sources of revenue. And the price of government goes up with the inflation, the insurance premiums I mentioned, and labor costs in direct relation to the cost of living. So taxes are limited to 1%. Property taxes are limited to 1% increases without the vote of the people. And property taxes are Mount Lake Terrace's number one source of funds. The city can only levy 1% more of the total levy amount. And in 2026, the total levy is 3.3 million. So our increase in revenue year over year, as Sergey mentioned, 33,235 more than what we received the year prior. This is distributed proportionally to all properties across the city, residential and non-residential. So here's a chart that shows how your property taxes are distributed across the many taxing authorities that cover our geographic area. The city general levy is 8% of the total tax bill. And the bond for City Hall that built the new City Hall and opened in 21, I believe, is about 1% of the total. So you can see on the chart there the average cost of a city of Mount Lake Terrace home, $591,000. And you can see the total tax bill and of that, what percent the city receives of that tax bill. A lot of it goes to our school districts and state schools. And then you also have other taxing authorities like the library. And again, the problem is statewide. So you can see here, many other cities around the state are dealing with the same issue. The items you see on the chart here are all true for Mount Lake Terrace, although we have been working on curbing overtime. This is particularly difficult if you're short-staffed and have to cover shifts with other people working overtime. I'm sure we all have dealt with that at one time or another. But we, in 25 and 2026, we have been able to cut police department overtime by 65%, saving about $350,000 a year. The National League of Cities reports that these trends are also true nationwide. Limited revenue sources, increased costs for public safety, inflation, cost of living and employee wages are going up, and infrastructure needs. And infrastructure costs, as you'll see here in a little while, have gone up dramatically due to supply chain challenges, easy for me to say, and tariffs. So this chart shows the total percent change in property tax revenues, and these changes are based on the assessed values of properties. So any 1% increase approved by our city council, any new construction, and any use of banked capacity. It compares that data to the annual Seattle Metro CPI, the inflation rates, essentially, from the U.S. Department of Labor. There are some fluctuations in the tax rate where the city council didn't take the 1% increase in a particular year and later used the bank capacity. In 2023, I'm sure many folks will remember the community voted to annex into the South County Fire or Regional Fire Authority. So the city collected about $1.7 million annually through the emergency services levy and a transport fee collected from the fire district. However, the city was subsidizing this service, even with that collection, with another $2 million in 2023. So that $2 million is straight out of the general fund. In 2023, Resolution 873, the city removed the emergency services levy and reduced the general fund levy amount by just shy of $7 million, just shy of $1.7 million. Beginning January 1, 2024. This is about what we were collecting from the levy and the transport fee. And we took our general levy revenues and we used to subsidize the fire department and refunded it to property owners. The difference in total tax collected between the regular levy and the emergency services levy in 2023 and 2024 was just short of $3 million. So in 2017, excuse me real quick. In 2017, the average homeowner was paying $506 to the city in property taxes. And that is for the average home in Mount Lake Terrace. If your home is assessed higher, it'll be higher. If it's assessed lower, it'll be lower. So $506 in 2017 in property taxes, and today they're paying $374, which is about a 35% reduction. And this was an intentional decision by the council. City council made in good faith to balance property taxes for residents. However, at that time, we didn't have all the data to paint an accurate picture of our long-term financial forecast. We were backlogged on closing out our financial reports from 2021 until just this last year. The next one I wanted to go a little bit more in depth on was the liability insurance premiums. And these have been increasing steadily in Washington state for governmental agencies. We have seen increases of $200,000 to $300,000 per year just in premiums, and that's the result of claims across our insurance pool, which are all cities that are similarly situated to us throughout the state. And here's the construction cost index I talked about a little bit earlier. Construction costs have risen steadily over the years. There was a big jump during COVID due to the supply chain and labor issues. Those issues were not totally resolved. And now there's the uncertainty of tariffs influencing construction pricing. The Seattle area construction costs are higher than the national average. It fluctuates quarterly, but recently the ranges have been between 2 and 6.6% higher than the national rate. Some more information about infrastructure costs. The general fund often supports street operations. As you can see on the chart here, those infrastructure costs continue to go up. But the general fund often supports street operations and capital projects in streets, parks, and facilities. And while the city has been very successful in receiving grants, there's usually a match required by the grantors. Sometimes it's necessary to enhance the match or support bids that come in higher than our engineering estimate due to the unpredictable market. Another piece are salary costs. So the largest portion of our employees are non-represented staff. They're not members of a bargaining unit. There are about 140 employees that are not represented post-COVID. Our total employees at City of Mount Lake Terrace is about 250. So the pay of the non-represented staff did not increase at the same rates as the bargaining unit partners. The first chart on the left shows COLAs over the years. COLA is a cost of living adjustment, which is a general term used in bargaining for raises and often includes comparison to comparable cities. So between 2011 and 2024, our police guild received 35.75% increase in pay. And the Teamsters, which represents many of our folks in public works, received a 30.5 increase. Then non-represented employees over that same time period received about 23%. So over, 13 years. On average, there was roughly a 10% disparity between non-represented staff and our bargaining unit partners. The market study that we did for our non-represented staff and the subsequent bargaining unit negotiations in 2024 attempted to provide more pay and benefit equity between these three employee groups. So salary costs here, the market study for the non-represented staff showed that all but one position of 49 job descriptions evaluated were below the market average. 81% of those positions were more than 5% below the market average. And there were some that were very far from the market due to how job descriptions were being compared. The market adjustment was necessary to retain employees. We would see a lot of turnover, people coming to join the city for 2 years and then leaving to go somewhere else where they would be better compensated. That turnover in staff, but in 22 and 23, it is roughly 25% of the entire staff, between 18 and 32%. And when we went to fill those positions, they were taking upwards of 70 days, more than 2 months, and some took a full year, 365 days to fill. So the COVID pandemic also had an impact on everyone, obviously, but we also had increased one-time revenues from both the CARES Act, if you recall that back in the beginning of the pandemic, and ARPA, what we call ARPA. The ARPA was American Rescue Plan Act, I believe, is the what that acronym stands for. But you can see here for the recreation pavilion in particular, the chart shows the revenues before, during, and post-COVID. And so pre-COVID, in 2017 to 2019, we were seeing roughly $2.1 to $2.2 million in revenue per year. That dropped significantly in 2021 and 2022. And then in post-COVID, from 2023 to 2025, we're getting back to that same revenue level. However, attendance was about 400,000 visits per year pre-COVID, and now we're at about 270,000 visits per year. You'll also see the costs of safety represented here. So safety in this context, we include prosecution, so our public prosecutor, our public defender, our jail facilities that we use, and our municipal court that we use. All those costs are rising with inflation, but public defense increased significantly due to a Supreme Court decision, a recent Supreme Court decision, that limits the number of cases that a single public defender can handle in a given calendar year. There are also limited public defenders, so that's a challenge that we're still working through, and that Supreme Court decision actually went into effect January 1, so a couple of weeks ago, and we'll have to see how that eventually plays out. But that is a significant driver in our costs. So, as I mentioned earlier, we were far behind in closing our books from 2021 until this last year. When we closed our 2024 books, our financial statement in the spring of 2025, it became obvious that we were using incorrect data over the years to build the budget, and the beginning fund balance was a little over $4 million lower than we originally thought, the data that we had. This was updated in the most recent budget amendment and in our long-range financial model. This is a summary of what we just reviewed, where we had changes in revenues and expenditures, and you can see the changes here on the screen. So the fiscal sustainability plan, currently expenses exceed revenues, and the city is using end of fund balance to pay for operations in the general fund. Between 2026 and 2029, that gap is about $4 million a year. After 2030, another $2 million will be needed. And without corrective action, the reserves will be depleted by 2027. We also must plan for the larger reserve, increasing it from 5% to 20% of the general fund, which is best practice. But it is solvable. Fiscal sustainability is achievable with timely implementation of a balanced budget package of strategies. And these strategies include revenue enhancements, efficiencies, and expenditure reductions. Leaning on only one of these will have severe service impacts, and we're trying to limit those as much as we possibly can.
Thank you, Jeff. Just wanted to welcome new folks who joined us and give you an update. We are going through a rather lengthy presentation. We hope to wrap up in the next 20 or 30 minutes and have time for you to break out into groups and have conversations about the proposals. I'm Carolyn Hope, Deputy City Manager. I'm going to talk to you about the various budget strategies that were shared with the Fiscal Sustainability Taskforce and deliberated. I'm going to spend more time on those strategies that were recommended and a little less on the others since there are 22 of them. But if you have any questions about them, we'll have time in a little while to ask some questions. So one of the things that Jeff just mentioned is it was really important for us to have a variety of strategies, those that are revenue enhancements, those that might change our service delivery model, the way that we bring services to you. Maybe it's contracted now and we bring it in-house or vice versa. Maybe there's just a completely different way to do something. Expenditure controls, just tightening our belt where we can. And service reductions, which would be reducing something we provide to the community, eliminating a certain service type. So it is important to look at all of these things and to have a combination of these budget strategies in our proposal, because doing one of these things and not another is really extreme and has consequences for service delivery. Some of the other things that we needed to evaluate when we're looking at the various strategies were, one, the fiscal impact. We have a pretty big gap to look at, about $4.2 million in the near future and more in 2030. So along with that is timing. So we just mentioned we want to make sure that we have some systems in place this year and more coming online next year to make sure our costs and revenues are in sync so that we're not depleting our reserves any further. And along with the timing is the difficulty of implementation. So some of the things that were recommended require more time, whether that's a contract negotiation, doing some research, building a new model, which we'll talk about. So some things are more immediate and some take a little more time. So just looking at that. And also, we want to make sure that we're looking at the impact of our decisions on the community, making sure that we're making equitable decisions, we're not harming one part of our community more than another, and that the impact on the city organization is considered. So if we're removing resources in one area, that we understand the impact it has on those that do the work, and that we're not overburdening one area or another. And then also, it's really important to communicate these strategies that we choose in the future here, so the community has clear expectations about what to expect, whether it's a service reduction, a revenue enhancement, a change in who's providing that service, or whatnot. So these are the 22 strategies that were presented to the Fiscal Sustainability Taskforce. We'll go through each one. And another thing just to be mindful of is that there were different timelines for some of these to be implemented. So sometimes if it was a big dollar amount, we wanted to phase it over a couple of years. So maybe half of the amount would be taken in one year and half in the next, and then it's a cumulative thereout. There also are some that could be implemented right away, some that might be added 2 years from now. So that is all accounted for in the model that Baker Tilly built for us, and that was used by the task force in making their decisions. There were also a number of strategies that the task force came up with, and we talked about these with them to evaluate what had a really significant fiscal impact and what are things that we're already doing, the timeline for certain of strategies to take place, and so forth. While none of these particular recommendations were recommended, a lot of these actions are underway by staff, and some will continue to be evaluated. So as we go through the strategies, you'll see these three symbols. The green symbol is the preferred package that the task force is recommending for your consideration. The blue is the alternative package, and the red is not recommended at this time. So here are the packages from a high level. There are core strategies in both packages. So the top 7 strategies are in both the preferred and the alternate package. And then the preferred package also has using 100% of our banked capacity. We'll talk more about that. And the alternative package has that same strategy of using the banked capacity, but only 75% of it, and adding 2 other strategies to the mix. So we'll go through these in detail. So a number of strategies related to recreation. And as you may understand, recreation is a voluntary service that we provide to our community. It's not a required service, but it is near and dear to the hearts of our community, and we understand that. We have one of the largest recreation programs in the region. In fact, it's hard to find another city that has as many recreation staff and programs and users as ours has. We have a 33,000 square foot recreation pavilion, which our community strongly identifies with. And we're going through a branding exercise right now, and it came out loud and clear that that is something that people attribute to Montlake Terrace as something that they're familiar with and that our community is proud of. So we provide aquatics, dance, childcare programs, racquetball indoor playground, and lots of other types of athletic and activities for our community to use. We talked earlier that our attendance took a dip during COVID. It is climbing, but we're still not back to pre-COVID levels. And the recreation pavilion, the facility itself, is failing miserably. You can see a picture. The top 2 right photos show some pictures of our boiler room and some of the pieces of equipment that are literally deteriorating. We can't find parts anymore. A lot of them have to be fabricated by a specialty shop. So it's a big endeavor to think about what to do with the recreation pavilion. And there are also costs associated with running programs. So we'll talk about both the facility and the programs here in a little bit. There was a task force put together in 2009 to look at all the city facilities and prioritize which ones we should do first and bring to the voters, because facility costs don't have their own revenue stream. There's not enough savings in the city to put towards building a new facility, and there's very few grants. There's sometimes, we can do some direct asks from our federal and state legislatures, and there's some energy grants, but really there's no grants for building city facilities. So a lot of that burden goes back to our community. And so we want to be really mindful of that. So back in 2009, we did a study about just replacing the pavilion, and the costs in today's dollars are upwards of $70 million. And that could increase significantly over time, pending when we actually go to construction. As we saw earlier, construction costs are rising, and what ends up in the facility. A couple things to note: that we've looked at this really carefully over time, and it would be fiscally imprudent for us to consider rebuilding this by ourselves. A bond measure at a minimum would be more than $450 per the average assessed value home. We recognize that's too much burden to place on folks, and those costs could be much more than that. And another interesting point is that many of our users, about 70% of our users, come from other cities. So talking about the capital project of replacing the pavilion, we have looked at various financing options and they are listed here. We could increase property tax through a levy or a bond measure. We could increase sales tax. We could create a special district. There's sort of a rent-to-own model where a developer, through this tax-exempt bond status, a developer could build the building and finance it, and we pay them like a mortgage. But again, we have to find a revenue stream for that. There's partnerships and donations and grants. And I just want to mention that there are some other special districts, but they're a little harder to use for this type of facility. And that some of these ideas could be used in combination with one another. So we'll get to some of that in a minute. I wanted to take a moment and talk about Metropolitan Parks districts, and that is because partnerships is a place where we think we need to go. We've had several conversations with City Council about this, and they've asked us to investigate partnerships. And the best way to partner with other agencies is through a Metropolitan Park District. So there were 3 options that the task force considered about Metropolitan Park Districts. And I just wanted to describe what that is. So it's a separate taxing authority. We had that chart earlier that showed how your property tax bill was divvied between different taxing authorities. This could potentially be another taxing authority separate from the city. It requires a simple majority vote to approve. Those funds can be used for operations and capital, and the Metropolitan Park District has the authority to bond on top of that. From a geography perspective, it could be just a facility. It could be just certain facilities in a certain geographic area. It could be all the parks and recreation facilities in a city. It could be all the parks and recreation facilities across a region. It's really open on how you build a Metropolitan Park District. The governance of a district, if we just did a city-only Metropolitan Park District, the City Council could be the governing board, or they could decide that it would be important to have a separate elected board, but either way would work. And there could be a combination of those folks as well. In a multiple jurisdiction Metropolitan Park District, it's up to the partners to decide. It could be representatives of each of their councils, maybe representatives of each of their councils and park boards, or it could be an all-elected board or some kind of combination. So those would be all things that the communities would have to decide on. So going back to the reason that we brought this forward to the FST, not that it's prime time yet. We still have a lot of research and discussions to have with our potential partners and with the broader community. But we wanted to see if it had legs and could be something to be considered in that 2030 timeframe, where we had another million or so to bridge the gap. So we wanted to get a sense of where the Fiscal Sustainability Taskforce was on these issues, and that would help us in moving forward with the revenue projections. So the Fiscal Sustainability Taskforce was really in favor of a city-only Metropolitan Park District. However, they do understand that this could be a solution for running our operations, but it's not a very fiscally prudent proposal to bond for a future facility. From a priorities standpoint, we could create a city-only Metropolitan Park District and add to it later. So it is possible to amend the boundaries of a Metropolitan Park District and add a city or two or some region later. And also it is possible to add the types of facilities or services later. So we could adopt something to begin with, and we could expand upon it in the future. Really, the FST, again, sort of going back to my original conversation that the community prioritizes the recreation pavilion and its services and really sees it as an identity for the city. That was reflected in the FST's comments as well. So I would say that the city only was the priority. That's what our revenue projection is based off of, but they're open to the possibility of partnerships if the pavilion is still located in the city. And I think that's still, there's a lot more conversation to be had about that with all of you in our broader community and with the city council as well. Okay, so then there were some other budget strategies that were related to recreation programming. We mentioned earlier that we have to subsidize recreation with the general fund. So I just want to talk about that a little bit. So recreation is basically a business, and we provide a service for a fee in most cases. However, there's something called cost recovery, and that is the percentage of the cost of the program. I'm sorry, the cost recovery rate is the revenue divided by the cost of the program. And we have a goal that was set by City Council of 80% cost recovery. The City Council felt it was really important that we subsidize youth programs. So those programs are discounted below the 100% cost recovery rate. All other programs have 100% or more cost recovery rate. So sometimes we make 125% on a certain program, as an example. But the average overall has to be 80% when we come back to the end of the year and do our numbers. So really the reason that cities and counties and other public agencies subsidize recreation is we're trying to meet the basic needs of our community by providing life safety, such as aquatics and a learn to swim, affordable childcare programs, a safe place for our community to meet and gather and build community. And those are the types of priorities of a public recreation center. So again, going back to the business model, here on where the plus sign is, we have the revenues. So we have program fees. We rent different facilities like ball fields and rooms in our recreation pavilion, even the pool. And we have some concessions. And then there's that general fund subsidy, which this changes over time, but this is looking at like this past year. The expenses include the administrative staff who come up with the programs, who manage the programs, who do the finances, who do the communications and marketing, who manage all of the people doing the programs. And then we have facility operations. There's definitely people who have to take care of the pool every day, who have to clean the building and do minor maintenance and major maintenance. And then we have instructors and supplies, administrative expenses, and so forth. So now we'll talk about those budget strategies. So the first one was a service delivery alternative, looking at a third-party operator. So some examples of this would be Yost Pool in Edmonds. They have a swim club that operates the pool. We in the cities of Sammamish and Snoqualmie, they built new facilities paid for by the community, by the city and the taxpayers. But they have an agreement with the YMCA and they operate the building, and they have different models of operations where they may be responsible for daily maintenance and may or may not be responsible for capital improvements. There is a model where we could hire our recreation instructors as contractors rather than employees. Some cities do that. We have such a diverse array of programs, from swim instructors to childcare providers to dance and exercise instructors, that could look different for us, but there are some options there. And then you could have a partial partnership where, say, you bring in a third party to do some kinds of programs. Like in Bellevue, they have a certain, not in all their community centers, but in some community centers, they brought in the Boys and Girls Club to provide U13 programs or after-school programs. So those are some kinds of examples. When we discussed this with the FST, they felt like it was sort of bad timing right now when we don't know the lifespan of the pool and the facility to enter into these third-party types of operations. We really don't know what lifespan we have on the pool. We just had a pump fail last week. We have another one that's also failing. So we're really just struggling to keep the facility operating and to enter into an agreement with a group that they're going to rely on to employ people and create revenue is challenging at best right now. Okay, the next one is reducing the subsidy for recreation. This one is considered a service level reduction. So really what this one is getting at is, would we eliminate a program area to save money? And I would say this is something that our recreation staff are constantly looking at. They're always looking at our cost recovery rates. And the challenge with this service reduction scenario in recreation is that each program has a fee. And so you have to balance our investment with the revenue. If we cut something, yes, we're going to save some money from the expenditure side, but we're also going to lose the revenue. So we just have to be mindful about that as we make those sort of decisions. But every year, the recreation staff do look at the cost recovery and they evaluate which programs should be removed or adjusted in some way to make sure that we meet our minimum attendance levels and recovery rates. So the FST did not recommend this one at this time, but they would like to see that we continue to analyze those efforts, the cost recovery rates, and the programs on a continual basis, and that we should consider what the program areas look like in a potential new building in the future. Then we had increasing our cost recovery rates for aquatics to 100%. Again, I mentioned earlier, most of the swim lessons are for children. There are some adults who take those programs as well. But the cost recovery rate is a councilmanic decision. Staff bring proposals forward and council approves our fee structure every year. And so it's really something we'd have to discuss with council in the future about whether we want to make 100% cost recovery for our youth programs and our life safety type programs. This is something that the FST thought we could consider in a future new facility and operating model as well. Another proposal was to eliminate our events position in most of our events. This was a really important aspect of the City Council's strategic plan and economic development strategy. We've had some long-standing events in our city for a while, like the July 3rd and the tree lighting event. And then since we hired an events coordinator about 3 years ago, we have boosted those events. So now we have more than 15 new events every year on top of the traditional events that we've had. And this person's responsible for earning sponsorship revenues. We're still working on ways to grow that. The person has some really great ideas about how to do that in the future. And they've been increasing our revenues each year, with the past year being close to $50,000. But overall, the FST felt like they believe that events are important to our growing community, both from an economic development standpoint and to build community and build a sense of safety among our community members. Freezing compensation and benefits. So this is an expenditure control. It was only recommended for 2 years. It's not sustainable in the long run. And we spoke quite a bit about this earlier, about how we got our staff up to market. We talked a little bit earlier too about when we weren't at market, how long it took to fill positions, and that we had quite a bit of turnover. So the FST felt like we were already lean. They felt like it wasn't a good idea to freeze compensation and benefits for the short term. It's not a long-term solution. And another consideration that we discussed was that we'd have to work with our bargaining units, and it would be difficult to get them to agree to this as well. So an internal cost allocation plan. I just want to describe this one for a minute. So we have utilities, three, we have stormwater, water, and stormwater, water, and wastewater utilities. And those are all enterprise funds. They cannot rely on the general fund. And if they rely on any resources in the general fund, they have to reimburse the general fund. And so that is our internal cost allocation plan that we're talking about here. So some of the services that support utilities are in the gray box: city manager's office, HR, IT, finance, and so forth. And so our internal cost allocation model needs to be reevaluated, and we will be doing that this year. There could be some savings or some additional revenues, I should say, that come to the general fund out of that. It's no guarantee, but it is something that the FST recommended that we continue to look at and hopefully find some additional revenues. Another small but important option is to look at software subscriptions and whether there's any redundancy, any extra licenses out there, if there's an ERP system or sort of like a larger software package that we already have that could have some affordable add-ons instead of buying a whole new product from a different vendor. So looking at efficiencies in our software is something that we're doing. We just adopted an IT strategic plan. And we'll be continuing to evaluate any efficiencies over the next year to see if we can achieve this goal of $50,000 a year. We also will look at historical budget savings. So you might be familiar with this in your own business or home finances, where you might sort of pad a certain budget line item because you're concerned about going over budget in that area. Maybe that's in a maintenance line item. Maybe it's in a line item that you just have never right-sized over time. And so we will look at this. One of the things we are concerned about is making sure we don't trim our maintenance line items too much, especially in facilities maintenance where we have these buildings that really need attention. We don't want them to get into a situation where we have a catastrophe. But we will look at supplies, contract services, training, and maintenance, and any other areas where we might have some historical savings where there's a line item that we historically have not spent all the money. Another proposal from the FST is to reduce our general fund expenditures by 5%. And they did propose that in two phases. So we would take 500,000 in the first year and another 500,000 or so in the second year. In the first year, we can do that without eliminating any filled staff positions. We'll remove some unfilled staff positions, and there won't be any significant service changes this year, but that is what we want to have a conversation about this spring, is how that might change in 2027 with the additional cuts proposed here. So you may or may not know that we have a fleet maintenance shop. So we repair all our own vehicles and other equipment like mowers and tools that we use out in the field. We also take care of the city of Shoreline's fleet, or at least a good portion of it. And we've been talking with them about taking on more of their fleet. And also, when we adjusted our salaries in 2024, we had to adjust our fees with Shoreline, and it was pretty significant. So we didn't adjust them as high as we'd like, but we told them we'd be back in 2 years and we'd renegotiate that rate. So this is the proposal. If we can earn another $30,000 out of that partnership, that would be ideal for the budget situation. Another option was to look at our police services model, and we have a commander that might retire in the next year or so. What would it look like if we removed that position upon retirement? This one was really contentious. There was a lot of debate about it. It's considered as in the alternate model, the alternate budget package. But it is something that staff would like to have the discretion to provide an alternate $250,000 savings, because this is a huge span of control issue for the police department, and it could affect our accreditation. But this was a significant cost savings, and there were very few other options at a certain point in time where we're trying to achieve this goal of over $4 million a year in cuts. So we'll be talking with council and the FST further about this option and trying to come up with a solution that's viable and meets the goals of our community. We also talked about a new service delivery model for police. In some cities around the country and even this state, there could be a savings in contracting with, say, the county, and the county provides service to the city. And the reverse option would be we provide police services to another community. So there's options here for the future. I think for a model where we contract with the county, that is not a financially viable option. And just looking at what their current contract rates are with other cities, we wouldn't come close to providing the same level of service to our community for an additional $3 million a year. So there are options for us to potentially provide services to others. We can continue to look at those, but we don't have enough information at this time to know how that would impact the general fund. But our city council members, city manager, and a lot of our directors are continually in conversation about partnership opportunities with our neighbors in the region, and this can continue to be one of those conversations. There was an option to eliminate a position that is not a required position to have in the police department, but is a very valuable position to our community, which is the domestic violence coordinator. If you're not familiar with what that position does, on the right in the gray box is a list of some of the key job tasks. And there is a nonprofit in Snohomish County that provides these kinds of services to our community, to our region. But I would say that our domestic violence coordinator provides additional services, and their caseload in the past year was 365 cases. 218 of them were criminal in nature. And our coordinator is supportive of the investigation and the victim, and can support the victim in their trial. And the coordinator also makes recommendations to the court and the prosecuting attorney about charges and sentencing. It's a really important role, and the FST felt like they did not want to see this position go away. Banked capacity. We mentioned this earlier. I wanted to take a minute and just talk about what it is. So the Snohomish County tax assessor is responsible for assessing the value of all of our properties across the county. And they let our finance director know every year what our available taxing authority is. So the tax assessed value of our community is upwards of $5 billion, I believe. If the council decides not to levy the whole amount of the available taxing authority, that creates a bank. And so this is what happened when in 2023, when council decided and the community decided to annex into the fire district. Council decided to lower the property tax rate to accommodate the new tax by the fire authority. So now there is a banked capacity of over $2 million. At the time, it was around 1.7. It grows over time with the value of property. And I just want to mention that this is ours to use. It is not the way that we save money for the city. We have a reserve that is our savings, as Sergey described earlier. Um, of course, the council doesn't have to use it all, but it is there for our use and it won't go away. Oh, wrong button. So just a reminder, the blue line here shows our property tax rate. I'm sorry, the assessed value, the taxing authority, and what we've taxed. I'm sorry. This chart shows our levy. So we levied about $3.2 million in the past year, and in the past it was higher. It was a little closer to $4.5, $4.8 million a year. So, and that's again because the council decided to lower the amount of tax each year. Okay. So the Fiscal Sustainability Taskforce evaluated whether to use the banked capacity or not. So this is a council decision. It does not have to go to the voters because this was our taxing authority over time. We decided not to use it all. And so council can make the decision to use that banked capacity. So the preferred option is that council use all of the banked capacity in a 2-year phased approach. So in 2027, take half, and in 2028, take half. In the alternate recommendation, they would recommend using 75% of the banked capacity also in a 2-year phased approach. This is a lift for our community. There was a lot of discussion about that. But the Fiscal Sustainability Task Force felt like this was it was a better option than some of the other options like raising utility taxes and other types of fees. They felt like it was a less regressive approach. We also looked at a general levy lid lift, which is also a property tax increase. And the FST felt like this wasn't necessary right now if we use bank capacity, and in the future we go for a Metropolitan Parks District. But if one or both of those things don't happen, this might be something that comes back on the table. Transportation Benefit District Sales Tax. So a transportation benefit district, this was created several years ago by the state legislature. They allowed cities and counties to develop a TBD for short. It is our city boundary, and it provides us the opportunity to create both a sales tax that goes to transportation uses and a license tab fee, which also goes to transportation uses. So the council had the authority to create the TBD and to create and it has the authority to create a sales tax, which we have not done yet. So this was a proposal to create the sales tax, which can add up to 0.3% to the local rate. We only receive a portion of that, but it's a pretty good revenue generator. It could raise about $1.4 million a year. There's another TBD option that we'll talk about in a minute, which was to raise the license tab fee, and the FST thought this was a better option because the sales tax is distributed among both residents and non-residents, and it's in smaller increments over time. So this was in their preferred package. We also looked at increasing the license fee. Right now it's at $20. Council has the authority to raise it to $40. Again, the sales tax was preferred over this. The sales tax also creates more revenue. But FST felt like this was more regressive, that there are a lot of people who, a lot of lower income folks who do rely on their vehicles to get to work for a lot of different reasons, and adding more expense to their vehicle cost was something that they were very mindful of. It was in the alternative package, but they were definitely more cautious around fees and other kinds of taxes. Speaking of taxes, we had two different types of utility taxes that were considered. The first was on what we call third-party providers, people who provide or organizations that provide electric, gas, telephone, and cable. And if we increased the tax, most of those were around 6%, as you can see in the table. Cable was at 5%. The state does have limitations on how much we can raise those councilmanically, but voters can increase the rate a little higher. So if we ask the voters to increase those rates, we could earn about $500,000 a year. However, the FST was not in favor of this. Again, they felt like these were critical services to our community members and were cautious about how this could impact the monthly and bi-monthly bills of our community members. Another utility tax would be on city services for stormwater, water, wastewater, and solid waste. And again, we have some of the highest taxes on these types of facilities because we're such a small city and we don't have that much sales tax revenue or property tax revenue for that matter, that we do rely on utility taxes quite a bit. Again, the FST did not recommend increasing these taxes. So I'm going to hand it over to Jeff to wrap it up for us.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'll run through the rest of this relatively quickly. We went a little bit over time on our presentation. I want to make sure people have an opportunity to have conversations about these recommendations. So you can see, or you will be able to here in a second. You can go to the next slide, please. There we go. So you can see the preferred budget package from the Financial Task Force includes the cost allocation plan, the ERP software subscriptions, historical budget savings, reduction of the general fund by 5%, which Carolyn mentioned, and then the property tax banked capacity at 100% over a 2-year period. On the next slide, you can see how that impacts our reserves. So we still drop down below the recommended levels for the next couple of years, but then by the end of the program, we get back to our goal of a 20% reserve shown on the chart here. So the preferred impact on fund balance again. There's city limitations on raising revenues, the liability insurance costs, and the costs of defense prosecution and our jail facilities. So the alternative budget package does include some of the same things that you saw before that were referred to as our core strategies. But then in the alternative, using the banked capacity at 75% of what is available, including a $250,000 reduction in the police department and a transportation benefit license fee increase from $20 to $40. So cities are struggling. Cities are struggling with that 1% cap. And you can see the impact of those here. So the alternative option, this is the impact on fund balance, pretty easy to see. It gets us to the same place, just in a slightly different way. And we do have issues in 2034 and 2035 with the alternative recommendation. So the pros and cons of the packages. So the preferred package, you can see that they're what the pros are. They're less regressive due to leaning more on property taxes. There is support for a Metropolitan Parks District. The task force was not in favor of reducing the general fund by 10%, but the 5% reduction instead was what they preferred. And then a city-only metropolitan parks district. And then another con is our already relatively high sales tax. The alternative does not use all of the bank capacity, only 75%, which impacts property taxes. It does eliminate a police commander position or a general reduction of $250,000 in the police department. And that is a con for some of the reasons Carolyn mentioned, including span of control issues and accreditation, possible impacts on accreditation. It's also more regressive, the task force felt. So with that, I think we're complete, only a little over time. Well, maybe a lot over time, but happy to go into the breakout rooms and answer any questions that folks may have. We're also always open to suggestions by anyone on how we can address these things. And we just really like to hear your feedback on the options that we're considering and working on recommendations for our city council to consider. So thank you.
Yes, if there are any questions people have that would be good to share with the broader group, feel free to type them in the chat, or can they raise their hand? Yeah, they can. You can raise your hand.
Good evening. I think you're going to need to just end the breakout rooms because they don't know how to step out. So I left hoping that would inspire folks, but I don't know if they know they can just hit leave. So if you can't close the rooms, they might be a while before they get back over here. I was going to say, I don't think anybody's able to move us. Oh, here we go. Here y'all come back. I was like, where's everybody?
Okay, we're back.
All right. Well, thank you to our task force members for facilitating our conversation. And I'm not sure if we got answers to all our questions, but really what we're looking for is if there was one budget package that resonated with you more so than the other. And if you haven't shared that with your facilitator, you could put it in the chat. If you want more time to think about it, I did add in the chat that we'll be posting the video from tonight, the PowerPoint as a PDF, and there will be a form you can fill out on our website over the next week with your preferences. So we'd really like to hear from you. The Fiscal Sustainability Task Force will be meeting again at the end of January to finalize their recommendations. So if you have thoughts that might change their minds, let us know. And then we will be presenting to City Council, and hopefully we'll see you out and about and at our budget meetings in May. So thank you everyone for your time. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. Have a good evening.